He's not my husband. Somebody please help me." I felt his hands before I heard his voice. David's fingers closed around my arm and my throat at the same time, one gripping, one squeezing, and the marble floor of the Whitmore Grand seemed to tilt beneath my champagne heels. "Aria, stop making a scene." His voice was low, controlled. That same voice he used in courtrooms and boardrooms, the one that made people nod and smile and never once question him. I yanked back. His grip tightened. 4 months. 4 months of a new city, a new number, a new name on the lease. 4 months of checking my rearview mirror at every red light and sleeping with my phone face up on the pillow beside me. 4 months. And he found me here, under a chandelier the size of a small country, in a room full of people wearing a combined net worth I couldn't calculate. "She's my wife," he announced to no one, to everyone. "She gets overwhelmed at these events. You understand?" He smiled when he said it. That slow, patient smile that told the room he was the reasonable one. I clawed at his wrist. "Let go of me. I am not your wife. Let go." He didn't. A woman in a black column dress glanced over her champagne flute and looked away. A man in a white tuxedo jacket checked his watch. Somewhere behind me, a string quartet kept playing. Something classical, something entirely unbothered. As David dragged me backward across the floor like I was luggage he'd forgotten at baggage claim. My bracelet caught the light as I struggled. The delicate chain David had given me 2 Christmases ago, before I understood what he was. I'd worn it tonight because I thought it made me look like I belonged here. Now it just felt like evidence. "You think you disappeared?" he hissed, his mouth close to my ear as he forced me toward the exit doors. "You think I didn't know exactly where you were every single day?" The room kept moving around us, glasses clinking, laughter floating, 70 people, maybe more, all of them carefully, deliberately, not seeing what was right in front of them. Because this was their world. And in their world, a man removing a struggling woman from a gala was a domestic matter, a private thing, not worth the social inconvenience of getting involved. I screamed again. My voice broke on the second syllable. That's when the front doors opened. Not the side doors, not the service entrance. One of the main doors, the ones flanked by 2 of the venue's security guards, who both stepped back without being asked, without a word exchanged, as if some frequency had been transmitted that only they could hear. A black limousine sat idling at the base of the steps outside, its engine a low, patient sound against the night. And the man who walked through those doors looked like he had never once in his life been in a hurry. Korean, mid-40s. His white dress shirt was open at the chest, not carelessly but deliberately, the way a man opens a shirt when he wants you to see what's underneath. And what was underneath stopped my breath. Ink, black and sweeping, covering his chest and torso in patterns that moved like something alive when he walked. His hair was slicked back from a face that gave away absolutely nothing. No anger. No urgency. Just a gaze that swept the room once and landed on David's hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. He just stood there, at the edge of the room, and the string quartet faltered on a note and stopped. David's grip loosened by a fraction, just enough for me to feel it. The man, this stranger, held David's stare for 3 full seconds, then slowly, with the unhurried precision of someone who has never once needed to prove a point twice, he reached up and undid the second button of his shirt. The room went completely silent. "Who are you?" David's voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. The man didn't answer. He just started walking toward us. No rush, no panic. His footsteps the only sound left in the entire room. And I realized, watching 60 people hold their breath for a man none of them knew, that I had been wrong about something. I'd thought no one in this city was watching out for me. I thought I was completely alone. Everyone saw what David was doing to me in that room. But only one man decided it couldn't continue. If you've ever wondered what happens when someone finally steps in, hit that like button and subscribe, and drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. You want to see what comes next. His footsteps were the only sound left in the room. Every person in that ballroom, every polished, perfumed, carefully indifferent guest had gone completely still. Not the still of people pretending not to watch. The still of people who had suddenly realized they were in the presence of something they didn't have a name for yet, in something that made the back of the neck go cold and the champagne taste like nothing. David's hand was still on my arm, but his grip had changed. The certainty had gone out of it. The man in the open white shirt crossed the marble floor without looking at anyone else. Not at the guests. Not at the security detail stationed near the side exit. Two large men in black earpieces who tracked his movement and then, almost simultaneously, dropped their eyes to the floor. He looked only at David. That flat, measuring gaze, like a man reading a contract and already knowing which clause is going to be the problem. He stopped 4 feet away from us. Let her go. 2 words. Quiet as a door, closing in an empty house. No threat in the delivery, no performance. Just the assumption, absolute and apparently reasonable, that the instruction would be followed. David laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too fast, the laugh of a man trying to locate his confidence and finding the shelf empty. This is a private matter. Walk away. The man didn't walk away. He reached up with one hand and undid the 3rd button of his shirt, then the 4th, pulling the fabric open with the same measured calm he'd used crossing the room. What it revealed made the woman nearest to us actually step backward. The tattoos began at his collarbone and spread. Black ink, dense and deliberate, covering his chest and the flat plane of his stomach in patterns I didn't have the vocabulary to name. Dragons, maybe. Something older than dragons. They moved when he breathed, which he was doing slowly, or as if he had all the time in the world and was simply choosing to spend some of it here. And beneath the open shirt, settled against his left side in a slim leather holster, was a gun. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He just let David look. The color left David's face in stages, like water draining out of something cracked at the base. His jaw worked without producing sound. His hand fell away from my arm completely, and I didn't wait. I stepped sideways, putting distance between us, my heels clicking against the marble as I moved toward the edge of the cleared space the room had instinctively made around the 3 of us. "You know who I am," the man said. Not a question. David's mouth formed a word but didn't finish it. "Say it." The silence lasted long enough that someone near the back of the room coughed, muffled, at the way people cough in churches when they're trying not to disturb something they don't fully understand. David swallowed. When he finally spoke, the name came out barely above a whisper. 2 syllables, Korean, landing in the room like something dropped from a height. Min-hee. The man's expression didn't change. That was what was most frightening about him, I would realize later. Not the gun, not the ink. The absolute absence of reaction to anything David did or said, as if David were a variable he had already accounted for in a calculation completed weeks ago. "The car outside," Min-hee said. "She's leaving with me. She is collateral," Min-hee said, and something in the word, the flatness of it, the precision, shut David down mid-sentence as efficiently as a hand over a mouth. "And her debt has been transferred. And which means she is no longer your concern. Which means your hands were just on something that belongs to my ledger." He paused. "I'd think carefully about whether that's a position you want to defend tonight." David looked at me. Whatever he was hoping to find in my face, permission or fear or some flicker of the woman he used to be able to control with a look, he didn't find it. He looked back at Min-hee, and then, without another word, without the speech I'd spent 4 months dreading, without the scene I'd always imagined would end with someone bleeding. David straightened his jacket, turned, and walked toward the side exit. The security guard stepped aside for him. The string quartet did not start playing again. Min-hee turned to me for the first time since he'd walked into the room. Up close, his eyes were darker than I'd expected. Aren't steadier. The kind of steady that doesn't come from being unafraid, but from having made peace with whatever it is you're afraid of long enough ago that you've forgotten the feeling. Can you walk? I realized my hands were shaking. I folded them together in front of me, the bracelet pressing cold against my wrist. Yes. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked back toward the main doors. And after a moment, because what else was there to do? Because David was gone, and the room was still watching, and the only direction that felt like forward was the one he'd just taken. I followed him. The limousine at the base of the steps was longer than I'd registered from inside. Black, unmarked, idling with a patience that matched its owner. 2 men in dark suits stood beside it, one at each end, and their postures the relaxed postures of people who are never actually relaxed. They opened the rear door without being asked. Min-hee gestured for me to get in. I stood on the steps in the cold night air and looked at the open door. The leather interior was dark and immaculate. A woman in a black blazer sat in one of the rear-facing seats, Korean, composed, watching me with an expression that revealed nothing. One of his people, clearly. Everything about the car, about the men beside it, about the way the world seemed to have rearranged itself around this man's presence, told me I was being given a choice that wasn't really a choice. Go back inside, to a room full of people who had watched David drag me across the floor and decided it wasn't their problem, and wait for him to find me again. Because he would find me again. And he'd proven that tonight with a thoroughness that made 4 months of hiding feel like a joke. Or get in the car. I got in the car. Min-hee slid in beside me. The door closed. The city began to move past the tinted windows. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The woman across from us was doing something on a slim tablet. Her focus, absolute. Min-hee sat with one arm resting along the back of the seat, not touching me, looking out the window at the passing lights with the expression of a man reviewing a list in his head. I watched my own reflection in the glass, the champagne silk of my gown catching the streetlights, the small diamond at my throat catching nothing because my hands were still trembling, and the air in the car was very still. "Where are you taking me?" I finally said. "Somewhere David can't get to you. That's not an answer." And he turned his head and looked at me with what might, on another face, have been the beginning of amusement. No, it isn't. He looked back out the window. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and watched the city fold itself into skyline, and I didn't ask again. The Penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building whose lobby had no visible front desk, only a single guard behind smoked glass who nodded at Min-hee with the deference of someone acknowledging a fact of nature. The elevator required a key card and a code. When the doors opened directly into the apartment, I understood that the word penthouse was doing a lot of work for what was actually a controlled environment at altitude. It was beautiful. That was the first thing, and I hated that it was the first thing. Walls of floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, while the city laid out below like a circuit board, all grid and light. Furniture in dark wood and slate gray, clean-lined and expensive without announcing itself. A kitchen that ran the length of one wall, stocked visibly with things. Fresh flowers on the central island. White, tall-stemmed, the kind that don't smell like anything. Min-hee's associate, the woman from the car, whose name I hadn't been given, led me through the main room and down a hallway to a door on the left. The bedroom inside was not a guest room. It had been prepared. That was the only word for it. The closet door stood open, and inside it hung clothing in a range I could identify in about 4 seconds as being exactly my size. Not approximately, not close, but the precise cut and fit of someone who had taken measurements from somewhere, somehow, that I couldn't account for. Dresses, slacks, a row of shoes on the lower shelf, toiletries laid out on the bathroom counter in a line. Every brand, something I would have chosen myself, which was the detail that crept up the back of my neck and stayed there. On the nightstand, a glass of water and 2 white tablets, ibuprofen, the packaging visible. I stood in the center of the room and turned around once, slowly, the way you turn in a space when you're trying to find the thing that explains the other things. The clothes are your size, I said, when Hee appeared in the doorway. Yes. How? He didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed, his shirt still open, the tattoos still visible, and he looked at me the way he'd looked at David at the gala, like he was reading something. Assessing the accuracy of a prediction. "You've been in this city for 4 months," he said finally. "You changed your number twice. You moved once. You kept your same gym membership because it was the one thing you didn't think he'd connect to you." A pause. He did. "I know because my people intercepted a message from his associate to a collection contact 3 weeks ago, with your location and your schedule. The water glass on the nightstand seemed very far away. You've been watching me. My people have been watching for you. There's a difference. Is there?" "The limo," he said. "The black car you've been seeing near your building, near the gym, near the restaurant on 4th where you eat lunch on Thursdays." His eyes stayed level on mine. That wasn't David. That was my security detail. I sat down on the edge of the bed without planning to, wore the silk of my gown pooling around me, because my legs had made a decision independent of the rest of me. I thought about all the times I'd seen that car and felt the cold slide of certainty that David had found me, that he was circling, that the only question was when he'd close in. All the nights I'd spent convinced I was already caught. "Why?" I said. "Why were your people watching me? You don't know me." Hee was quiet for a moment. In the hallway behind him, I could hear the low murmur of his associate's voice on a call, precise and brief, the sound of a world that kept moving on its own schedule regardless of what happened in this room. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." He pushed off the door frame and walked back down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed in someone else's clothes, in a room designed to anticipate my needs, 43 floors above a city that had watched me scream for help tonight and turned away, and I stared at the floor for a long time before I turned off the light. He told me in the morning. Not at first. First there was coffee. Actual good coffee, made by the associate whose name I finally learned was Ji Yeon, presented without ceremony or warmth, the way everything in this apartment was presented. Then silence. Hee sat across from me at the kitchen island with a folder open in front of him, reviewing something, while I wrapped both hands around my mug and looked at the city below us, turning itself gold in the early light. Then he closed the folder, set it flat on the counter, and looked at me. "David has a gambling problem," he said. "You may have known that." "I suspected it," I said carefully, toward the end. "It's not a small problem." He turned the folder so it faced me and opened it again. Inside, printed on clean white paper, were numbers, columns of them, dates attached, a ledger of some kind that I couldn't fully parse, but whose scale I could read without difficulty. The numbers were large, the kind of large that doesn't belong on a personal balance sheet. He was into 2 separate organizations before he approached mine. He settled both of those debts by moving money that didn't belong to him through accounts that couldn't easily be traced. A beat. He ran out of accounts. He ran out of untraceable money. He approached my organization 8 months ago with a proposal for a new arrangement. I looked up from the folder. What kind of arrangement? Min Hee's face didn't change. He offered collateral. Physical assets, 2 properties, a vehicle, some jewelry, and 1 additional item. He reached across and turned the page. A notarized marriage certificate, filed in the county records, listing him as husband and you as wife, with documentation suggesting joint ownership of all outstanding liabilities. The coffee in my mug went cold while I read the page. Then I read it again. The date at the top was 14 months ago, 7 months before I had finally left him, 3 months before the last time he'd cornered me in the kitchen of the apartment we'd shared and told me that if I ever tried to leave, he would make sure I had nothing left to leave to. I never signed this, I said. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. I never signed anything like this. No, Min Hee said. You didn't. He forged it. He forged it. Or had it notarized by someone on his payroll, filed it, made you legally a co-signatory on a debt to my organization of, he tapped the number at the bottom of the page, approximately $2.3 million. I set the mug down, picked it back up, set it down again. So when he grabbed me at the gala, I said slowly, working through it, he wasn't just trying to get me back. He was trying to maintain the illusion of the marriage, Min Hee said. If you disappeared from his life completely, if you established publicly that you were no longer together, the certificate becomes easier to challenge. The collateral becomes questionable. 3 other creditors would immediately come looking for repayment in other forms. His tone was neutral, informational, the tone of a man explaining a weather system. And he needed you visible and accessible, and preferably silent. The city outside the windows went on being gold. Someone down there, 43 floors below, was going about their Thursday morning without any awareness that up here, a woman was sitting in a borrowed cashmere sweater, learning that her ex-husband had sold her name to organized crime as a financial instrument. And you, I said, you said last night you'd transferred the debt, bought it. Yes. Why? He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the sense again of someone measuring something, of a decision being weighed not in this moment, but over a much longer span of time than I was aware of. David's been defrauding multiple organizations simultaneously for nearly 2 years, he said. When my people discovered the forged certificate, I had a choice. Report it through channels. Now, which would result in consequences for David that would be swift but imprecise and would not necessarily reach the other parties involved in his operation. Or use me as the anchor, I said. I could hear the edge in my own voice, and I didn't try to file it down. That's what you said last night. At the gala, she's collateral and her debt has been transferred. He didn't look away. Yes. So you're using me, too. I'm keeping you alive, he said, and the simplicity of it, the complete lack of defensiveness, was somehow worse than an argument would have been. There are 2 other organizations that also hold forged documents with your name on them. David sold the same certificate 3 times. Without my protection, you'd have been collected by someone less interested in keeping you intact within the week. And I thought about the black car outside my building, the weeks of thinking David was closing in, the way I'd been holding my breath since I left, waiting for the moment the walls came down. They had been coming down. I just hadn't been able to see from which direction. So what am I then? I said. To you. What exactly did you buy? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which was the only thing he'd done since last night that felt, in any small way, like a kindness. For now, he said, you are the reason David can't run, and the reason the people he defrauded can't quietly bury what he did to them. He closed the folder. Beyond that, we haven't written that part yet. I found the tracker 4 days later. It was in the lining of my handbag, the one I'd been carrying at the gala, in the one Min Hee's people had returned to me the morning after, pressed and handled with the same impeccable care as everything else in the penthouse. a small flat disc the size of a coat button, stitched neatly into the inner seam. I almost missed it. I didn't miss it. I stood in the bathroom with the bag open on the counter and looked at it for a long time, then looked at my own face in the mirror. The bruising on my arm from David's hands was yellowing at the edges now, the purple fading to something softer and less honest. I put the bag down and I didn't say anything to Min Hee or Ji Yeon, but I kept the tracker. And the next evening, when Ji Yeon was occupied on a call in the back of the apartment and Min Hee had left 3 hours earlier in the car with 2 of his men, saying only that he had a meeting and would be back before midnight, I looked at the tracker's signal on my phone. He was at the waterfront, the southern edge of the port where the city turned industrial and the streetlights stopped bothering. I told myself I needed air, that I'd been inside for 4 days and the 43 floors of glass were starting to feel less like a vantage point and more like a display case. I told myself I had a right to know what was being negotiated in my name. I took the elevator down and walked for 20 minutes through streets that got darker and smaller and more honest. And when I found the shipyard, I did not go in. I stayed at the chain-link perimeter in the shadows between 2 storage containers, and I watched through the fence. The shipyard was rain-slicked and lit by 2 portable flood lamps that turned everything the color of an old photograph. There were vehicles parked in a rough semicircle, 3 black cars, 1 white van with the plates covered, and standing between them, maybe 40 feet from where I crouched, were 5 men I didn't recognize, and 1 man I did. Min Hee stood at the center of the semicircle with his hands in his pockets. He'd changed into a dark jacket since leaving the penthouse, the collar up against the rain, and he was listening to a man twice his weight with the same expression he'd used to listen to David at the gala. That careful, cataloging attention, nothing entering or leaving his face without his permission. The other man was talking fast. I was too far away to catch the words over the rain and the creak of the shipping containers, but I could read the shape of the conversation well enough. The other man wanted something, was making a case for it. His hands moved as he talked, large gestures that meant either passion or desperation, and the 2 men flanking him kept their eyes on Min Hee's people, 4 of whom stood back into the sides with the stillness of furniture that can move very fast when required. Min Hee said something when the other man finished. Short. 3, maybe 4 words. The other man's hands dropped to his sides. Then Min Hee reached into his jacket and produced a folder, thin, sealed, and held it out. The other man stared at it for a moment before taking it. He opened it, read whatever was inside for about 30 seconds, and then his entire posture changed. The shoulders came down, the chest deflated. He said something that looked like a question, and Min Hee answered it with a single nod. Whatever was in that folder, it had ended the negotiation. I watched Min Hee's people return to the cars. I watched the other vehicles begin to pull away one by one, headlights sweeping across the wet asphalt. I was already backing up, already recalculating the distance back to the building, when Min Hee turned. He didn't turn toward the cars. He turned toward the fence, toward the shadows between the storage containers where I was standing with the rain in my hair and my phone in my pocket and no good explanation for any of it. He looked directly at me, not in my general direction, not toward the perimeter, at me specifically, or with the accuracy of a man who had known exactly where I was from the moment I'd arrived, possibly from the moment I'd left the building, possibly before that. I didn't move. There was no point. He said something to the man nearest him, who nodded and got into the car. Then Min Hee walked across the shipyard alone, through a gap in the fence I hadn't noticed, and stopped in front of me. The rain was falling steadily now, and he didn't seem to notice or care, the way people don't notice weather when they are occupied by something more important. He looked at me for a moment, then at the bag on my shoulder, then back at my face. "The tracker," I said. "The tracker," he confirmed. "You knew I had it." I knew the moment you found it. Ji-yeon noticed you'd been in the bag. I let out a breath. When the rain ran down the back of my neck and I resisted the urge to pull my collar up because it seemed like the wrong moment for small comforts. Who were those men? Representatives from one of the organizations holding your forged documents. And the folder. Evidence, he said, that the document they hold is fraudulent, that David defrauded them, that pursuing it will cost them considerably more than releasing the claim. He paused. A persuasive argument, presented in the right language. You're dismantling it, I said. The whole thing, everything David built around my name. Yes, why at a shipyard? Why not? Because some conversations, he said quietly, cannot happen in a room with a paper trail. The rain intensified for a moment, drumming against the containers above us, and we stood in it while I processed the fact that the number of things I didn't know about this situation still vastly outnumbered the things I did, and that the man in front of me was the only map I had, and he was still only showing me one road at a time. You should have told me, I said, about the meeting. You should have asked, he said, instead of following me. I didn't know I was allowed to ask. Something shifted in his face. It was subtle. A fractional softening around the eyes, gone before I could be certain I'd seen it. You're allowed to ask, he said. He turned toward the gap in the fence, back toward the cars, and after a moment I fell into step beside him because the rain was getting worse and because the alternative was standing alone in a shipyard at midnight with a tracker and no answers. And because 4 days ago I had made a choice, standing outside a limousine on the steps of the Whitmore Grand, and choices like that, I was beginning to understand, had longer consequences than a single night. Min-hee, I said. He looked over at me. The other organization, the third one, the one that still has a copy of David's forged certificate. He held my eyes for a moment without answering, and the rain came down between us, and the city glittered on the water beyond the fence, like something precious that knew it was dangerous. Yes, he said finally, there's still the third one. He didn't speak again until we were back in the car. The doors closed, the rain reduced to a sound against the roof. His people in the front seat stared forward with the disciplined incuriosity of men, paid to have excellent peripheral vision and no opinions. Min-hee sat beside me and looked straight ahead for a long moment. When he finally turned, the lamp from a passing streetlight moved across his face, and I saw something there that I hadn't seen at the gala or in the penthouse kitchen. Not anger, something more deliberate than anger. What you did tonight, he said, cannot happen again. I needed to know what... I understand why you did it. His voice stayed level. I'm not explaining my feelings to you. I'm explaining the mechanics of survival in my world. The men you watched tonight don't know your face. That changes now. The moment you became visible at that fence, you became a variable. Variables get used. He paused. Or they get removed. I held his gaze. So I'm supposed to sit in the penthouse and trust that you're handling everything. You're supposed to understand, he said, that there is no room in this for improvisation. Not from David, not from the people he owes, and not from you. He turned back toward the window. In my world, the people who make mistakes don't get to make a second one. I have kept you outside that rule so far. But I cannot do that if you put yourself inside the perimeter. The car moved through streets that were emptying now, the city pulling itself inward the way cities do past midnight, and I sat with his words arranged in front of me like furniture in a room I was still learning the dimensions of. You said there's still a third organization, I said. Yes. And David, he said, is currently aware that 2 of his 3 safety nets have been cut, which makes him cornered. Cornered men make the kind of decisions that create problems for everyone around them. A beat. Which is why I need you where I can account for you. I thought about David's face at the gala. the way the confidence had curdled when he'd heard Min Hee's name, the way he'd left, not beaten, not finished, just temporarily redirected, the way water moves around an obstacle and keeps going. He'll try something, I said. Min Hee didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. He tried something 4 days later. Ji Yeon told me, in her precise and economical way, while setting a cup of tea on the counter in front of me without being asked. She said that a contact had informed them that David had made 2 calls the previous night, one to a man who ran a crew out of the eastern docks, a crew whose methods Min Hee's organization considered excessive even by the standards of the world they all operated in. And the second call had been to someone who, for the right price, could provide a location and an access window. My location, my access window. He's trying to sell me again, I said. He's trying to move you out of Min Hee's protection so that Min Hee loses leverage, Ji Yeon said, which was the same thing stated with greater precision. If this crew takes you first, the situation becomes complicated. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Outside the windows, the city was doing its indifferent daytime business, all glass and movement and complete lack of awareness. Where's Min Hee? On a call. He'll want to speak with you when he's done. He came to find me 20 minutes later in the main room, where I was standing at the window not really seeing anything. He was in a dark shirt today, the sleeves rolled up. Amani looked like a man who had been awake for a long time and had decided it wasn't relevant. You heard, he said. Ji Yeon told me. He nodded, unsurprised. He stood beside me at the window and looked out at the city for a moment, his reflection overlaid on all that glass and light. David has made contact with a crew that operates without the kind of agreements that keep situations from escalating unnecessarily. If he gives them what he's offering, it becomes a different kind of problem. Can you stop it? I can end it, he said. David, the debt, all of it. There's a meeting that can be arranged with all 3 remaining parties at once. Evidence presented, accounts settled, the fraud exposed at a scale that makes continuing it more costly than releasing it. He paused. But the meeting would need to happen in a location and a format that doesn't allow for a clean exit if someone decides the evidence isn't persuasive enough. I looked at his reflection in the glass, meaning you'd be walking in with no way out if it goes wrong. Meaning I'd be walking in prepared for it to go wrong, he said, which was a different thing, though I wasn't entirely sure how. The city below us went on moving. A taxi cut across 2 lanes. Someone on the street walked fast with their head down, occupied by something private and urgent. Ordinary Thursday mechanics, completely unaware that up here, a man was telling a woman he was prepared to go to war to close a ledger with her name on it. I turned from the window and looked at him directly, not at his reflection, at him. Whatever is necessary, I said. I mean that. Do whatever is necessary. He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in that look that I didn't have a word for yet, something that had been accumulating over the past 10 days in small increments. In the coffee, waiting in the morning, in the way he'd said you're allowed to ask in the rain at the shipyard, in the precise and deliberate way he explained things to me when he could simply have not. It wasn't warmth exactly, it was something more considered than warmth, something that had been examined before it was extended. Get some sleep, he said. I'll be back before morning. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and walked toward the elevator, and his 2 men materialized from wherever they'd been and fell into position behind him, and the doors closed and the penthouse was very quiet. I went to bed, and I didn't sleep. He came back at 4 in the morning. I heard the elevator, heard the low exchange of voices in the main room, and I lay in the dark and waited. After a few minutes, there was a knock at my bedroom door. Not Ji Yeon's knock. I'd learned the difference. Come in. He opened the door and leaned against the frame the way he had that first night, and he looked different. Not injured, not shaken, just slightly more human than usual, the careful architecture of his composure sitting a degree looser on him, the way expensive clothes look at the end of a long day. He held up a folder. David was taken to St. Aurelius Medical Center at approximately 2 this morning, he said. Non-life-threatening. He'll recover. A pause that told me the non-life-threatening outcome had been a choice, not a limitation. He is also, as of 40 minutes ago, in the custody of 2 federal investigators who've been building a fraud case against him for 11 months and were waiting for sufficient evidence to move. They have that evidence now. He set the folder on the nightstand beside the water glass. The forged certificates have been flagged as fraudulent in the county records. All 3 organizations have released their claims. The debt, your debt, no longer exists in any ledger, anywhere. I sat up in the dark. The folder sat on the nightstand. I didn't open it. He's going to prison, I said. For a significant portion of what remains of his useful years, Hee said, yes. I looked at the folder, then at the window, where the city was doing the blue-black business of very early morning. The hour when everything is still and the only people awake are the ones who couldn't sleep and the ones who never intended to. Is it over? It's over. I sat with that for a moment, turned it over, tested the weight of it. 4 months of hiding, and before that 2 years of something that had taken me a long time to name correctly. And before that, the slow and careful process of becoming someone who believed, genuinely believed, that she was built for something smaller than what she'd wanted. All of it behind a word that should have felt larger. Over, I said again quietly to myself, rather than to him. Yes. He didn't move from the doorway. Get some sleep, Aria. It was the first time he'd used my name, not the collateral, not you. My name in his voice, in the dark at 4 a.m, or settling into the room like something that intended to stay. Hee. He looked at me. Thank you, I said. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and pulled the door closed behind him, and I lay back in the dark with the city outside the window and David in a hospital bed and a folder full of endings on the nightstand, and somewhere around 5 a.m, for the first time in longer than I could accurately remember, I slept without barricading the door. 6 weeks later, I walked back into the Whitmore Grand. Same chandelier, same marble floor, same string quartet stationed near the east wall, currently working through something that floated above the crowd without demanding attention. The Beaumont Foundation Gala was the city's most photographed event of the winter season. And the room was already full of precisely the people who had been here the last time. The woman in the column dress, the man with the watch, the whole careful ecosystem of people who had learned to curate their attention like a financial portfolio and invest it only in things with guaranteed returns. I stood at the top of the entrance stairs in a gown the color of deep water, midnight blue, structured at the shoulder, falling clean to the floor. And I felt the room register me before I'd taken a single step. Not because of the dress, not because of the jewelry, though the pieces Ji-yeon had selected were precise and understated in a way that communicated more than extravagance would have. Because of the man beside me. Hee stood at my left, his hand resting at the small of my back with the easy authority of someone who has decided something and is not interested in debating it. Dark suit, perfectly cut, his collar closed tonight, his posture the same immovable architecture it always was. His face was doing the thing it did in rooms, cataloging, measuring, assigning value. But when I glanced at him, he was already looking at me, and the expression I found there was the one I'd been accumulating a vocabulary for over the past 6 weeks, the one that had no quick name but that I recognize now the way you recognize a key by its specific weight in your hand. We descended the stairs. The room parted. Not dramatically, Not the way crowds part in films with gasps and dropped glasses. Just the natural, instinctive movement of people who understand, without being told, and that something has shifted in the order of things. Conversation stepped sideways, sightlines adjusted, and the woman in the column dress, who was standing near the bottom of the stairs with a fresh glass of champagne, looked up and met my eyes for the first time, and I watched something move through her face. Recognition, recalibration, and then a careful, deliberate nod. I nodded back. Min Hee's hand stayed at my back as we moved into the room, and I let it. And when a man I didn't know approached from the left and bent toward Min Hee's ear with something urgent, Min Hee listened without turning his head and then said 3 words that sent the man away satisfied, all without moving his hand and all without his eyes leaving the room ahead of us. "Comfortable?" he said quietly near my ear. I considered the word. The chandelier above us threw light in every direction, the way chandeliers in rooms like this always do, making everything look expensive and momentary at the same time. The marble beneath my heels was the same marble I'd been dragged across 6 weeks ago, and somewhere under that memory was the specific sound of my own voice cracking on the word please, and under that was 4 months of hiding, and under that was everything else. And here now, this room full of people opening space for me as I moved through it. This man beside me whose presence had reorganized my understanding of what safety could look like and what it cost. "I'm getting there," I said. He made a sound that, from any other man, I might have called a quiet laugh. We moved deeper into the room, into the light and the noise and the string quartet's patient music. Oh, and no one looked away this time, and no one turned back to their champagne, and the woman in the midnight blue gown walked through the Whitmore Grand like she had always belonged there. Because she had, and she knew it now, and so did everyone else.